Welcome to the Excruciating Minutiae Podcast, where we obsess about sports, pop culture, and politics, but mostly sports. Here are your hosts, Randy and Steven.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Excruciating Minutia. And before we begin, I'd like to ask everybody, please check us out at excruciatingpodcast.com for all the links to all your favorite places where you can listen to us on a regular basis. And today we have a very special episode as we are coming live from my man cave in suburban New Orleans, Louisiana, or at least somewhat live. When you're listening to this, it won't actually be live, but it's live for me. And it's also live for my friend Steven, who is no longer coming from the bowels of New Jersey, where he usually records from, but is now actually sitting across from me in the same room. This is a different occasion, isn't it, Steven? You've been in this room before, but never to do a podcast.
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad to be here. And yes, it was an interesting trip up to it's actually not a man cave. Let's be clear about that. It's more like a man attic. It's in the upstairs. You have to pass through a huge room, which is basically your collection room, I guess. I don't know what you refer to it as.
Obsession room.
It's an issue.
Yeah.
It's you have a problem.
First step, acknowledging you have a problem. I acknowledge that.
So I passed by about 1,000 figurines still in their original packaging, displayed prominently on the walls and in display cases and all that kind of stuff. A number, probably over 100 figurines, statues rather, and then walked into the recording studio, which actually is more like a true home theater. So glad to be here all weekend. Part of our draft weekend, which is what I'm down here for. We had our draft a couple of days ago, which was a entertaining day, as it always is, but we had some really, really amazing highlights this year.
And as you mentioned, this is our 27th year, I believe, of our Fantasy Baseball League, which is, as you mentioned, the reason you've come down to New Orleans. And this was exactly what you said, a pretty unique draft day. And we've had some crazy draft days before. And we're going to talk a little bit about our draft day, just because of some of the unusual moments and things that happen. We're also going to touch on some fantasy baseball notes as we get ready to start the regular season for Major League Baseball. And we're going to be talking about some of the guys we like, not just from our draft, but overall, some of the guys we didn't like. And for all of you that are in our league who listen to our podcast, yes, there's a reason we didn't do one of these prior to the draft. We weren't going to go ahead and let you know who we liked and didn't like. We're not that dumb. Or maybe we are that dumb. When we talk about my roster later, saying that I was dumb may be something that comes out of your mouth. But Steven, as you said, we have some very interesting stories. So we want to keep some level of anonymity for these people, correct? Right?
Actually, in this case, no. Usually names are changed to protect the innocent. However, in this case, nobody was innocent. So we have no need to change anyone's names whatsoever. We did have some unbelievable moments during the draft. It started almost right out of the gate at breakfast. I'll let you go into that a little bit.
Well, before we get into breakfast, things were going on even before we got to breakfast. And let's be honest, there are people in our league that this is a fun league. Like I said, we've been doing it for 27 years now. We've had a lot of the same owners in it now pushing 20 years. And, it's competitive. We all have fun. That's the main reason. But we're all very competitive. And there were literally Machiavellian levels of espionage and deception and torpedoing and sabotage that were going on leading into this, including, Steven, how was my yard? Did you like my yard when you pulled up, when I brought you from the airport? How did my yard look, Steven?
Your yard looked sensational, nicely trimmed. The flower beds were weeded. The bushes were nicely cut. Everything looked very presentable.
Okay. And would you like to guess who did this? I have no yard crew, as you're well aware, correct?
Correct.
No. So what happened was my wife, who is also in this fantasy league and is not a typical female. She's you'd agree with this, correct? She is very well versed in sports, knows what she's doing. is very good at fantasy baseball as well as fantasy football. She went ahead and basically set me up to be doing yard work on the Wednesday before you arrived, literally the day before you arrived, the last day I had set aside to do my final draft prep. And Steven, was it an accident?
Probably not.
No, it definitely was no accident. And if she listens to this, you know it wasn't an accident. So no innocence there. So I just got screwed. I had a whole day I had prepped to put aside. And basically, I was told you have to do the yard. And I couldn't get out of it because my father-in-law and my mother-in-law were here to help with the yard on her instructions. And they weren't leaving. And I couldn't convince them to leave. So I spent my draft prep day from 9:15 or so in the morning until 8 o'clock at night. It was dark. My mother-in-law was pulling weeds out of a flower bed at 8 o'clock at night. What was I supposed to do? Sit inside in the AC while my in-laws are in the hot sun pulling weeds while I'm trying to figure out who the fifth starter in Cincinnati is?
The answer to that is yes, you should have.
Well, you saw what my team looked like on draft day. Absolutely, I should have done that. But no, I had to do the right thing, the noble thing. I worked in my yard. I didn't leave it. I did the heavy lifting. You know, I cut the yard. By the way, I have a pretty big yard, don't I?
Yes.
Guess what type of mower I had to use for the yard? A riding mower? Nope. Wrong answer. That was a push mower because magically the belt on the riding mower is somehow or another become displaced and I can't fix it. Accident or sabotage? What do you think?
Are we going into a conspiracy episode again?
We could, but I'm not accusing anyone on the air of doing anything to torpedo my team. But this is a person, and you were there, who one time, because I bid on a player they wanted and got them, walked across the room and proceeded to throw me out of my chair to the floor in an act of violence. You were there. Is that not correct?
I don't really want to get involved in your marital problems.
I wouldn't say they were problems. She had absolutely no problem tossing me out of that chair that day. And that was a number of years ago. And to be frank, we're both a little bit older and more mature. So the sabotage can come in more subtle ways, like yard work, which is where that went.
I agree that she's more mature. I'm not sure that you are, though.
I appreciate that. See, these are the things we could say when we're face to face and not necessarily separated by thousands of miles. So other funny things going into this draft, most people in our league use computers. And a shout out, there's a gentleman by the name of Merv who has a product called RotoLab. And if Merv ever should listen to this podcast, Merv, tremendous product you have out there. It's basically a program that allows you to put teams in. It gives you statistical values, has projections. It's a great tool rather than the old days when we started. We used pen and paper, right? I mean, that was the old school way. That in a magazine that was 3 months old, right?
We would wait every March for the USA Today Fantasy Baseball special to come out, which was a big day. It was usually the second or third week in March, and that was really the Bible that everybody used back in the days when we would do stats by hand as well, that we didn't have stat services.
They still print the USA Today, don't they? They still print newspapers, right? That's not really a thing, though, that fantasy guide. They don't do that anymore, do they?
No, the guy that they used to have doing that fantasy guide, I don't think is with them anymore. And it's kind of like a pet project of his, and it used to be part of USA Today. Then it was its own separate publication. And then it just kind of faded away.
Well, that was the old days. As you mentioned, nowadays we do things differently. We all use computer programs. Well, most of us use computer programs. And I say this because we have one owner, and for sake of anonymity, we'll call this owner Mike. And Mike showed up, and he had been out of the league for a year, which if you asked him, it sounded like he hadn't played since it was the dead ball era. He kept saying he didn't know anybody. It's like, Mike, these guys, it's pretty much the same guys you knew 2 years ago. Not everybody retired in 1 year. This is not a fresh group of Major League Baseball players. And yet, Mike, unfortunately, was having computer issues, so he was reduced to pen and paper. But not traditional pen and paper. You were watching him. He literally just started in a stream of consciousness writing names down of people he knew in no alphabetical order, no numerical order, no statistical order, not by teams or positions, not by any value, just random names. I'd say it was like a phone book, but at least the phone book is alphabetical. This wasn't even that. It was just literally I remember this guy, let me write his name down. I'm not even sure if he wrote down good guys or players he wanted. I just think it was people he remembered. For a long time, until I printed him up sheets, that was all the prep he had. I should have left him with that. How well do you think his draft would have gone? I mean, literally, he could have pulled out a yearbook or, like I said, or my phone book and maybe picked better than what he was trying to do. So now, in the end, to be fair, once he got a little bit of actual names in front of him in the form of some cheat sheets, he actually didn't do too badly. So, Mike, if you're listening to this, you did maybe better than I did at the draft, and I had a computer program. Again, not really sure what that says about me. But the yellow pad, I mean, when's the last time we saw yellow pad and paper, but with no what was the organizational plan there? There had to be some thought process behind that, right?
I've never seen that. Even in the old days when we used to do a lot of this with pen and paper, there were sheets and it was by position, it was maybe by team, maybe by value, and they were grouped together. So you would have a sheet and here are all the guys you are targeting. Here are the guys you're trying to avoid. He just had this random smattering of hundreds of names. I mean, it wasn't just like one page. It was hundreds of names of players in no order whatsoever on these yellow legal pads. I've never seen anything like it. It was an interesting way of studying. I will never attempt to do that myself, though.
Well, I will say the names on the pad, I think I recognize like the person who took our order at Wendy's. There may have been the mailman on there. I mean, I literally think he was pulling names out of thin air. I think I saw names like of the movie that was on the television when we came in. It was like a Kaiser Soze moment. I think he was pulling random stuff. Like, you've seen The Usual Suspects, right? Spoiler for anyone who didn't see it. It's like when Kevin Spacey's weaving that story and he's pulling names off of everything he saw. I really think at some point that's what Mike was doing to prep for this draft. How is this team projecting better than mine? I have no idea. What the hell? Is that me? I'm speechless. I don't know.
I was waiting for him to draft Joe Barstool and, Max Table and,
Kelly Refrigerator. I think that would have been a good pick.
He's a big power hitter, that Kelly Refrigerator.
Well,
so
he's hefty. He's pretty wide. So, So this was all before the draft. This was only the appetizer. This only just got yourself kind of just warmed up for what we actually saw on draft day. So there was, in Major League Baseball, Shoeless Joe Jackson. Of course, everybody remembers the member of the White Sox back in the 1900s, early 1900s, part of the infamous Black Sox, banned for betting on baseball, betting on the Chicago World Series against Cincinnati. And, there's Shoeless Joe. We had Shirtless Joe, did we not? And again, I've never seen anything like that at our draft before. The people at Denny's, where we had our pre-draft breakfast, probably had never seen anything like that, or at least after the sun comes up. I'm not sure I ever want to see anything quite like that again at our draft. And Joe, if you're listening, and I know you are, love you to death, but I wish you had invested in wearing multiple shirts. Oh my dear God, please.
If Joe ever won this league again, I suggest that he use his winnings to go get waxed. There was a unbelievable amount of fur covering that body of his that was I've never seen before. If I touched his back, it would be more like petting a dog. That's all I can say. We were there at maybe 7:30 in the morning. He walked in maybe at 7:45, and he was hammered. This is 7:45 in the morning, not 7:45 at night, 7:45 in the morning. And apparently he had been DJing during the night and then went out drinking afterwards. He was doing shots until 5 in the morning.
Well, that's your shot taking time normally, right? That's when you want to be taking shots, is 5 in the morning before your fantasy draft. Now, he has a partner who I'm sure was thrilled to death at the condition his partner was showing up in. We've both known Joe, in air quotes, for a number of years, and I've never seen him quite like that. Have you?
Never.
There are certain parts of that I don't think I ever want to see again. Joe is in shape, though. Round is a shape, right? He was bulbous, I think, even. It was, Joe said that he wasn't quite himself that day. I'd like to think that that's the real Joe, who fights to come out on a regular basis. And in this brief moment, we were given a window into the real Joe and the real inner self. At one point, he had his shirt off in Denny's. He had his shirt off multiple times at the draft. He made a beer run. He made multiple beer runs in the middle of the draft as his partner scrambled to figure out what they were doing with the team. Because at some point, the thought process for him went, I don't need to worry about what I'm going to do for power for our team. I need more alcohol. Because I think he was afraid that if he quit drinking, that would be game over for him. So he needed to kind of keep drinking to stay going. And I will give him credit. His staying power was amazing. I think at one point later in the afternoon, he was in better shape than we were. And we hadn't had anything to drink the night before.
Well, speak for yourself.
Okay. Well, I had nothing to drink. I was stunned. I was amazed at his staying power, the stamina for a man who had worked and drank to that level to even be walking. My hat is tipped off to you, Joe. That was pretty amazing performance.
I think what was more amazing about it is he continued to drink throughout the draft. And we finished the draft probably at about 5:30 in the afternoon. And he had to be back at work for 10 o'clock. So there was no going home and going to sleep, sleeping it off and getting up and, going about his business. He had to work that night and then had to work the next morning because the Irish-Italian parade was going on down here, and he was DJing that as well.
Has he gone to sleep to our knowledge? I think he has finally.
I think he has. I'm assuming he's at his normal 9-to-5 job today, but, or maybe he called out sick. I have no idea.
Or maybe he's still drinking and doing another fantasy draft somewheres. He might not remember the one he did. He might think he needs to be in another league.
Considering some of the picks they made, he may want to forget that. But I will say this. We've always made the joke about him and his partner, and we'll call him Daniel, that we always make the joke, who's the brains of the organization? And they had a moment a few years ago where Daniel did the draft alone because Joe couldn't make it, and they ended up winning the league that year. So the joke has always been that Daniel was the brains of the organization. They went in this year with a huge lead in team value based on the keepers that they had, and they should be prohibitive favorites going into the draft. They were prohibitive favorites to win this year. I'm not sure that Joe contributed a lot to what they did this past weekend, but Daniel does have the built-in excuse that he was babysitting Joe and really wasn't paying attention to the draft, because that's basically what he was doing. Joe is literally just walking around, making jokes, talking to people, handing people beers while the draft.
He was a distraction, not a bad distraction. I mean, he was funny, but there's part of the problem. We're laughing with him. We're having a great time because he's hilarious. Was this more subterfuge? Was this part of the plan? I don't know. If it was, guys, hats off to you, because while I'm laughing at one of you, I'm drafting a bad team. That may have been the part of the plan. And usually there's another league owner, and we'll just call him Neil. And he's usually the guy who's the distraction. He's usually loud and can be kind of boisterous and can laugh a lot. And well, he used to be. He now has a family and he has responsibilities, so he doesn't drink to the level he used to. But he was remarkably quiet, our friend Neil, and it's because literally he got out-Neiled.
Some guy? Neil! George, forget about Neil. You've out-Neiled him.
So I'm Neil. How did I do that?
I don't know, but you better keep it up.
There's a new Neil in town.
It was like Joe sucked all the air out of the room, and Neil didn't know what to do. And Neil also has this dancing statue that when he presses a button, it dances and sings a song, and it's annoying as hell. And he's had it for years, and usually most days on draft day, he's hitting the button for it to start its whole process of dancing and singing. He probably does it 24 times over the course of a day. He did it twice on Saturday. Twice. It was literally like he didn't know what to do. he was out of his element. He's like, that's my job. Why is he doing my job? And it
didn't know what to do with himself.
He did not know what to do with himself. It was pretty funny, amazing. There was definitely some role reversal going on there. It was what was that movie with Ryan Reynolds and Jason Bateman where they like were pissing in a fountain and their streams crossed and all of a sudden they became each other? I forget. I'll look it up. God, that'll drive me nuts. But it was almost like that. It was like almost
a body
like
swap.
Yes, absolutely. It almost was like a body swap movie. I wouldn't be surprised if we find out later that was exactly what happened.
Yeah, there was supernatural or mystical forces at play apparently there. Because Neil normally is the guy in the room who gets people off their game by his bidding practices or his little motorized apparatus to make noises that annoy everybody or laughing or whatever. And he was strangely silent. I agree with you. I think it was because he didn't quite know what to do because this guy's doing my job. That's exactly the case. Neil in the past has had not such good success in this league. He has something, when some team finishes in dead last in our league, we will normally award them a plunger, as in a toilet plunger, because that's to signify your team was so bad that it belonged somewheres at the bottom of a toilet somewheres. This year, for the first time ever in our league's history, we actually had a tie for last place. So one of those teams was Shirtless Joe and his partner Daniel. They had finished tied in last place. Who was the last place team they were tied with? Anyone? Bueller? You're looking down, and I can see this because you're in the room with me, so you can't escape. Steven, that was you, wasn't it?
I can neither confirm nor deny. I think it was my evil twin brother that no one knows about.
Is this like mirror universe, Steven? Like out of Star Trek? I mean, is that what you're going to blame it on? That's okay. And this time I actually had to bring 4 plungers to the draft because Mike of the yellow pads, the year before, his last year in the league, before he had to take the 1-year hiatus, he finished in dead last, or at least his team did. But he had to actually turn the team over to somebody to run the rest of the way. Who was that, Steven? Do you remember?
Oh, I don't remember that at all.
You don't remember that?
No.
I could swear that might have been you. But that was Mike's fault. We'll blame that one on Mike and the yellow legal pads that year, even though he had a computer.
It was me, but I was hamstrung because I could not make any trades and I could only make free agent pickups. So there was no way to maneuver that crappy team that I had nothing to do with putting together at the beginning of the year. It was in last place when I took it over. It was much closer to not last place when I finished with it, which was remarkable considering I could really do very little with it. It may have been one of my best managerial performances in this league, and I've won the league twice. But that was a challenge. It was literally like trying to manage a team with my hands tied behind my back. But yeah, I guess I was part of that as well. But
I'm not blaming you for that debacle. That one's all on Yellow Pad Mike. But Yellow Pad Mike did get a plunger as well, because as we said, being out of the league for a year and then coming back and avoiding the plunger presentation you would have gotten if you'd been there, we don't forget in our league. So I actually had to give out 4 toilet plungers. When I went to Home Depot and purchased them, the look on the face of the person who checked me out was pretty unique. I'm not really sure I didn't explain to her what I was doing. I didn't feel the need to, but I got quite the funny look, which, I told her I just had a lot of problems at home with my plumbing. And that was all I was going with because, not really much more needed to be said. So that was a new thing. That was something we'd never done before. Other fun stuff that happened during the draft. Our champion is actually a local personality, and he was fashionably late. So he's usually one of the last people into the draft room, but he really pushed his weight around as league champion. He was very vocal. He was very demonstrative, and I was sitting a couple spots down from him, and I've won the league a number of times, and I had to point out to him that, this is how the league champion acts. You're doing a good job down there. So he really fell right into the role of defending champion very well. We also had, sitting to my left, the team that finished right behind me last year, and we'll call this gentleman Adam. Now, Adam may or may not be listening to this because as we told him about our podcast, he mentioned he didn't listen to podcasts. I told him he could listen to us on YouTube. He said he doesn't watch YouTube. I asked him what he did. If he watched like PBS specials, if you looked at some of the teams he's drafted in the past, I'm guessing maybe he's been watching Ken Burns' baseball documentary and pulling names from that. But he's what, Steven? A Braves fan, right? And who's his favorite player?
Well, now his favorite player is Freddie Freeman. It always is the best Brave at that time. In the past, it's been Chipper Jones. It was Jason Hayward for a brief period of time.
Andrew
Jones, he had a hard-on for a number of years. But now it's Freddie Freeman, and also Acuna is the other guy that he's really hot to trot for. But his fantasy kryptonite is Freddie Freeman.
And the way it works in our league, he had Acuna already as a keeper. And Acuna we like. We can both, here's your first actual fantasy tidbit. No joke, here's your news flash. Acuna is really good. He's talented. He's going to be very good for a very long time. So, Adam owns him. He did not own Freddie Freeman. Every year, someone tosses out Freddie Freeman. Adam pretends that he doesn't want him. Our auctioneer gets ready to sell him, and then Adam chimes in the bidding. And then it's just a question of how far someone's willing to push him until Adam finally wins the bid. We were waiting for that to happen, except when a bid got to $50, and we have a $300 auction league instead of a traditional $260 auction league. When it got to $50, which is what Adam paid for him last year, Adam said nothing. Nothing. What was he doing?
I was checking to see if he was asleep. I thought maybe he had dozed off and somebody needed to kick the chair to wake him up. Being in last spot, I was the last team to nominate a player, so 16 teams in, and I looked and saw that he was still available, and I was like, well, you know what? Let's just get the elephant out of this room right now, and threw him out there, I think, for a 30 or 40 bucks. I think with $30 I threw him out for. It's one of those moments where it's like, that Adam is going to have him. It's just a matter of how much money he's going to pay for him. And then somebody had him at $50 and was going once, going twice. And like Randy just mentioned, it typically would be literally just as the auctioneer was saying sold, he would pipe in with his first bid. And it never happened.
I called a timeout because I was waiting and I was sitting next to him and he wasn't doing anything. I thought he was dead. I was worried we were going to have to do CPR on him or something because I'm like, he can't not be talking. Is he choking on a peanut? Is he drinking something? Is he asleep? Like you said, is he in a coma? What's he doing? He's not saying anything. So we have timeouts that we can stop the bidding. So many to use in the draft. I called one.
Not that you had any need to bid on him yourself. You just were trying to wake up.
Yeah, I'm trying to help the guy. And then he doesn't, and then the timeout goes and he still doesn't bid. And then he didn't get him, followed by what happened immediately following this. And he waited, I think it was he did it right afterwards. And then apparently the other player he was targeting was Nolan Arenado, who was available. And when he didn't get him either, one of the funnier moments of our draft, Steven, you can explain watching it because you had a better view. I was kind of in the line of fire, but you could kind of see it from where you were sitting, what he was doing.
Well, he obviously had a number of sheets with plans of what his strategy was going to be based on who he got. And he must have had 6 or 7 of those sheets. And so when he didn't get Freeman, first page, get crumpled up, tosses it into the garbage can across the room. It happened again after he didn't get Arenado. Happened a number of times. By the end of the draft, he had no more sheets. He was completely doing something not within his plans. And the ironic thing about it is, as I was watching him put his team together, I'm like, wow, this is a very un-Adam-like team because it actually has a lot of talent on it. By not bidding all that money on Freeman, who really is never worth the money that he pays, he got a number of really good players that he would never have had the ability to get. And he got himself a very nice outfield, well-balanced. It was funny. One of the things he mentioned to me afterwards, he goes, I got all these guys, but they're basically all the same guy. And I'm like, yeah, so what? They're all good. That's the common thing about them is they're all good. And usually he would have Freeman and, to use his term, and 3 other meatballs, right? But he ended up with, Justin Upton, Nick Castellanos, Michael Conforto. He ended up with Nelson Cruz. Those are 4 really productive players. Now, obviously, all of them didn't add up to what Freddie Freeman, but by not getting Freeman, he kind of started doing that. And I thought he actually had a pretty good draft. Well, better than normal anyway.
Yes, he may have a better draft. He might have a better team, but let's be honest. He is emotionally crushed, even today, that he doesn't own him. And the team in our league who owns Freddie Freeman better get ready, because there'll be phone calls and emails and more phone calls
daily
and text messages, because he's not going to be able to get away from it. He's going to attempt to trade for Freeman. And then the next day we have another league that we do together, a smaller AL only league. He was in it and denied when I asked him, when are you going to start trading for Freeman? He's like, I'm not going to try that. And I'm like, what? It doesn't matter now. You can take the poker face off. You can't go a whole season. I would literally want to make a bet that there's absolutely no way he goes the entire season without owning Freddie Freeman, because at some point, all he'll have to do is overtrade for him. And he can't go a whole season without it. It's like asking, a diabetic to go without their insulin shot. He'll just drop dead, right? I mean, he can't do that.
I would suggest you make a clown suit bet with him over it. But the problem is like, he would be so afraid of losing the clown suit bet that he wouldn't trade for Freeman. And that actually would help his team, because you're right. If he trades for Freeman, whoever owns him should know that they can hold him over the fire and really take him for a lot more. He should be able to overtrade. He should be able to get a lot more in return for Freeman than normal. The funny thing about that is afterwards, he really seemed to be kind of out of his element and wasn't paying attention. And he's normally like kind of sharp, and he was weird after that. I mean, not in a bad way. Just, it was like he wasn't as outgoing, and as he makes a lot of boisterous comments, and he just didn't do any of that. And then finally, we had the moment that may have been one of the funnier fantasy moments of the draft. And I'll let you explain, since you were completely in the middle of that.
Oh, yeah. This was all me. And you mentioned him kind of being not on his game, maybe because he was distracted by not owning Freeman. And I'm guessing that's what kind of led to this. First of all, as Steven mentioned, clown suit bet in there for anyone obviously not in our league who would like to know what that is. And you're welcome to appropriate it for use in your fantasy league. Over the number of years we've had this league, people have made challenges to one another and made bets. And one year I made a bet with an owner, and the bet was that whoever lost whatever it was we were betting on had to dress up in a clown suit, as in circus clown, for the following year's draft. And they had to wear said clown suit for the breakfast beforehand and for the entirety of the draft. They couldn't just put it on for 5 minutes and take it off. I won that bet and put someone in a clown suit bet, or in a clown suit. I did a similar bet with this gentleman who we're calling Adam, and lost that bet. And there are still photos of me in clown regalia still floating around the internet today. In fact, your phone, when I call you, is a picture of me in the clown makeup. Is it not, Steven?
It is.
Well, so that clown suit bet thing, you're absolutely right. I think Adam would absolutely do whatever it took to put me in a clown suit again. So you're right. That I'm not making that bet with him, because I'm going to let him sabotage his own team and trade for Freeman at some point. The best part is he won't be listening to this podcast. He has no idea that we're talking about him sabotaging his team. So we'll just watch him do that. But a way his team was sabotaged and he wasn't paying attention, and like you said, was out of his element, was when I threw, who was it? It was Sergio Romo, who, if anyone who's been following baseball for the last year knows, Tampa Bay has instituted this wacky opener strategy with their pitching staff where they use relievers to open games. And Adam and I have had lengthy discussions, and at some point, Stephen, we will actually discuss the opener strategy for Tampa and its use in baseball and whether it's a viable strategy or not. Spoilers, I don't think it is. I think it's just terrible management and a terrible idea. It's baseball's version of the Wildcat, and I really don't see how it's going to work, and I think it's going to be forgotten about. My friend Adam here obviously believes otherwise, to the point where he thinks it's going to be so widespread in baseball that we actually needed to make changes to our rules to accommodate that, which we didn't do. The way our eligibility works in our league, if you get so many starts, you're starting pitcher only. We actually draft starting pitchers and relief pitchers, not just pitcher slots, and that's different from a lot of leagues. Is that correct?
That is. Most leagues just have a certain number of pitchers. Doesn't matter what the breakdown is, whether it's a starting pitcher, relief pitcher, but our rules are very specific. You have to have X number of starting pitchers, certain number of relief pitchers, and there's specific rules as to how we define a starting pitcher and a relief pitcher.
So Adam, who is very convinced that all these teams in baseball are going to make this a widespread strategy in the years to come, had actually voiced concerns that we needed to update our rules and change them around to accommodate for it. As I told him, as commissioner of the league, I didn't think we needed to, that I wanted to see more data and actually see if it mattered, because to me, we're not even going to be talking about openers 3 or 4 years from now. So I tossed out Sergio Romo, simply because I wanted to get a guy out I had no interest in owning, and a guy who was, I thought, relief pitcher eligible. And I bid, and to my left, Adam bid, and ended up rostering the player. And as we moved on to the next player, the light bulb went on in my head as I remembered he was one of Tampa's openers last year, wasn't he, Steven?
He was.
And that made him starting pitcher only. And that's not really where Adam had expected to put him, was it, Steven?
No, it is not. And it's going to take a long time for him to gain relief pitcher eligibility.
Yes, it will. And unfortunately, that really wasn't in his plans to do that. And I don't think it really affected him all that terribly. But his reaction, to say the least, I think was somewhat aggravated. What would you again, you were sitting across. What would you say it was at that point?
Well, his facial expression said it all. He looked agitated, angry. You could see he was starting to get red in the face. And even more so when another one of the owners in our league, and we'll call him Dave, made a comment. He goes, "Randy just broke a bird off in Adam's ass." And one of the things I thought was hilarious was, it would have been really funny if you had done this on purpose, but you did this completely randomly. You just as easily could have gotten stuck with him if no one else bid too. That wasn't your intention.
That is absolutely correct. Now, he's convinced, I think, that I did it on purpose. But as I told you during a break in the draft, I had forgotten, because he's with Romo's with the Marlins now, right? So I didn't see Tampa. Anytime somebody from Tampa popped up on my radar on my draft screen, it was basically, if it was a pitcher, I was immediately worried about, okay, where are they eligible at? But with Romo, with him being with the Marlins now, it didn't dawn on me until I'd already tossed him. And like I said, until after he'd been rostered. I didn't do it intentionally to him. I wish I had. That would have been Machiavellian. That would have been perfect compared to some of the other stuff. But you know what? Sometimes accidents are just as good as doing things on purpose. And it was a classic moment. And I think he's still angry. What do you think? You think he's still angry? I think he's still mad about that. He's probably going to be mad about that all season, if I know him to some extent. When we get to the draft next year, he's probably going to be waiting. Maybe I've planted that seed in his mind that at any point I might be trying to torpedo his team. That's actually not bad to have that going for you, right?
Well, my worry would be that he's going to try to get you back in some fashion. So
he can try.
Well, I'm not saying he's going to. I don't think he's sharp enough necessarily. I guess I can say that since he isn't going to listen. This guy that we're going to call Adam is not sharp enough to necessarily understand that you're not going to fall for that crap. But if he wasn't out of his element enough from not rostering Freddie Freeman, this really pushed him over the edge. And he definitely, as he was filling out the tail end of his team, I would say that it was rather uninspired. He ended up with some guys that I was like, not really. His team is actually pretty good, though, because he came in with a huge keeper base, and he actually did a nice job when he pivoted, not getting Freddie Freeman. A couple of the other things that happened as part of our draft day, some of the other funny moments. You and I had a conversation the night before the draft, and your wife was there, and we were talking about who we thought was going to do what, and we were actually filling out our sheets of integrity, right? Our predictions, our pre-draft predictions that we all put on paper, and then afterwards see who did the best job predicting what might happen. And in some way, the conversation went towards, who ends up screwing with you on draft day and who you hate getting into bidding wars with. And Randy's wife basically said, you know who I hate getting into bidding wars with. And Randy's like, I know exactly. And so she had written it down on a piece of paper, and she wrote down a name of one of the other owners, and we'll call him Ken. And basically on this sheet of paper, it just said, Ken sucks. So at some point during the draft, they got into a little bit of a bidding war, and you could tell that Crystal was it wasn't on a big player, but it was somebody that Crystal wanted, and she was bidding against this gentleman that we'll call Ken. And you could tell she was getting agitated. She tends to roll her eyes when she gets angry. And then Randy piped in with, you said something about it and started the conversation about how she hates getting into bidding wars with Ken. And Ken said, he goes, let me guess. And he named the player that started with 3 years ago.
He absolutely remembered the player. Matt Moore was the pitcher 3 years ago that he had gotten into a bidding war, which I believe was his first year in the league. And I remember her getting agitated, and every year it seems like the two of them get into it with one another. And you're right. There was a point because we took a break right after this player, and I looked at him and I said, Ken, she's told me before, you're a really nice guy. We love having you in the league. She really thinks you're just, like I said, just a nice overall person. But when you get in these bidding wars with her, you just simply piss her off. And at that point, he got kind of a little bit gun shy because then they got into another bidding war. And as she said, he backed down. So what happens? She got mad at me. Why mad at me? She got angry. I did her a favor. I got him out of her hair by telling the story, didn't I?
You did. I also threw her further under the bus than Randy did, which was to say, yeah, she hates getting into bids with you so much that she wrote that sign, Ken sucks on that piece of paper, and it's still sitting at Randy's house. And of course, when we got back from the draft, the first thing I did was, where's that sheet of paper? And took a photo of it. And it's now posted on our league message board for all eternity. So everyone will be able to enjoy that. We also had some other weird things that were happening. So another guy in our league, we'll call him Matt, who works at the bar that we have our pre-draft lunch at, which is the day before. And we had seen him the day before, and he wasn't on crutches. And then all of a sudden he shows up and he's on crutches. And we're like, what the hell's going on? Apparently he got gout, or he was suffering from it the day before, but it had really gotten bad the next day. And I'm thinking to myself, isn't gout something that like 50 and 60-year-old men get?
How old is he?
Matt's got to be in his 30s.
You don't get gout in your 30s?
Well, apparently down in Louisiana, you do.
What, you get gout by eating too much crawfish? Can you get gout by drinking beer? What did he do? How do you get gout? I'm legitimately asking this question. How do you get gout? Go to WebMD. Well, if you type in symptoms for gout, WebMD is just going to tell you I have cancer, because that's what they always do. Do they have gout symptoms? What do they say? How do you get this?
It's a form of arthritis caused by excess uric acid in the bloodstream. You get formation of uric acid crystals in the joints. And so because it's crystals, it's like this sharp pain that you're getting, because it's almost like as you're putting pressure on it, it's like these sharp objects are hitting you. Let me see. What can trigger a case of gout? Gout triggers foods. There you go. Foods that are high in a substance called purines can raise the uric acid level in your blood. This includes organ meats like liver, seafood like sardines, anchovies, mussels, salmon. I'm guessing crawfish probably falls within that. And that was one of the things he was doing on Friday. It's Friday during Lent in Louisiana. People eat seafood. And apparently he also, when I was talking to him during one of the breaks, he said his father has had multiple instances of getting gout, his grandfather. So it can also be hereditary. So, but still, you don't expect to see a 30-year-old, 35-year-old guy walk into the draft room on crutches because he has a severe case of gout.
Well, if you're listening out there, I can just tell you, Matt, I feel really bad for you. And I'm not making light of your illness at all with that, because I don't know if you could see from where you were sitting. You actually had a pretty good vantage point, again, of where we were at. We had a room where we had 2 entrances, and he would always come in at the end of a break from one entrance. And to get back to my seat, I always happened to be on the wrong side, and I would have to go back out the room and around the other side. And at one point, he's like, "You need to get by." I'm like, no, you're on crutches. Here, let me get out of your way. I felt terrible for him, because you're at that age. That's not what I would have expected. I thought he had been like he had dropped something on his foot, or he'd been hit by a car or something like that. I never would have guessed gout in a million years as the reason for the crutches. Never.
Could this have been more subterfuge? Another diabolical thing? He didn't really need to be on crutches, but he just threw everyone off and made everyone feel sorry for him. So maybe they'd take it easy on him. I mean, at this point, the conspiracies are running wild in this league. It wouldn't shock me that what anyone would do to get a leg up in this league.
We saw so many weird things. A 30-some-year-old man on crutches with gout wasn't even in the top 5 strangest things we saw at the draft, which made this draft just so phenomenal. Our defending champion at one point pulled out he was like channeling Heath Ledger's Joker at one point, because we have another owner in the league, and we'll call him Bobby, who, again, really nice guy, but sometimes has a few issues pronouncing some names. Would you say that's a fair assessment, Stephen?
Yeah, typically he has a real difficult time with Asian names.
Okay. So coming up for bid was Sin Soo Choo from the Rangers, and he started to say his name, and he was kind of choking on the chew, so to speak, as he was trying to get the name out. And our defending champion, who is, again, a very nice, mild-mannered, pleasant, funny guy in everyday life, leaps to his feet and shouts across the room at him, "Say his name. You can't own him if you can't say his name." And we're all dying laughing because we know he can't say his name, right? It was like that scene from The Dark Knight with Ledger's Joker. He's literally screaming at him. And I'm like, he's channeling some dark inner power here. I almost fell out of my chair when he did that. That was hilarious.
It was kind of out of character for him. He is a respected, well-known personality down in Louisiana. And, he was dropping a lot of F-bombs and it was hilarious. He was unfiltered, I guess. It was filter-free draft day Saturday.
It's often unfiltered. That's the good thing in these private drafts. But it's not like it was the only profanity. We have another owner, and we'll call him Jim, who was introduced by this local celebrity, right? It's a friend of his. And this is another newer member to our league. And this is his second year in our league. And this gentleman, Jim, last year had drafted for the first time, was really very quiet, was very unassuming. He was somewhat more vocal during this draft because you were sitting closer to him. But at one point, all of a sudden, we had a guy up for bid, and I don't remember who it was. And Jim, who was sitting kind of across from me, jumps up from his chair, screams timeout at the top of his lungs, and says, "What the f***? Why are you people not bidding on this guy? What are you f***ing doing?" Right? And then he did it again on the very next player, and it came out of nowhere. It was like all of a sudden he went from, what was the Spinal Tap reference? He went from 0 to 11 in no time flat. And I was like, where did this come from? I think we had a lot of body swapping at this draft. There was people acting out of character, people that were injuries, people with confusion, people with alcohol, people with no clothes on. I mean, it was crazy. All we needed was a guy wearing a t-shirt that said, "I suck at fantasy baseball," with a pink unicorn on it. And then we would have been perfect, right?
Well, we actually had that. So when Shirtless Joe eventually put on a shirt to become, Shirted Joe, I guess, he was wearing a pink t-shirt with a unicorn on it that said, "I suck at fantasy baseball," which somebody had dropped off for him since his team had won the plunger the previous year, tied with me, actually. And so there was that. And also, we flew by one of the funniest moments of the whole day. This was at breakfast, and I was sitting next to Joe, who kept on putting his arm around me, kissing my head. Like I said, he was hammered. I asked him, "Does your partner know that this is going on? He goes, he won't care. I'm like, well, is he going to be okay? He goes, he's fine. My partner is half a chromosome away from being Amish. I was drinking coffee. I nearly spit it across the room.
That. Oh, I remember that. That may be one of the funniest lines I've ever heard someone say about another person in my presence before. And it might be true. I mean, I've known his partner for, again, longer than I've known him. And his partner's, again, a family guy, really nice guy, quiet, mild-mannered, and a good babysitter, apparently, because he definitely had to look after Shirtless Joe over the course of the draft. You were sitting next to him. I can only imagine some of the conversations that were going back and forth between the two of them. I just kept on my side of the room, the person sitting to my right, I just kept pointing over, and I'm like, see him over there right now? That's Joe saying we need to bid on this guy. That's Daniel saying, no, we don't. And there's that look on Daniel's face, that exasperated look that says, oh my God, why did he go get another run of beer? That's basically the look I kept seeing over there, which was really funny to us on that end of the room. But then again, our side of the room, let's be honest, we had a much better view because we sit in a big U and we sit in the order of finish. So I was on the good side. I finished third in the 16-team league last year. So out of my window, it was a beautiful view because it was a beautiful day on Saturday. It was sunshine and there were kids frolicking and dogs barking and leaves, and it was just gorgeous. What did you see on your side of the room, Stephen? I don't think it was quite as nice, was it?
Unfortunately, the picture window that Randy was looking out was to my back, which caused numerous problems during the course of the day because the sun was coming right in. So it got really warm because I was in direct sunlight. And we're using computer, and the glare coming through the window was really difficult to read the computer screen. But the worst part of it was the wall that I was kind of facing, the wall that was to your back, because I was kind of facing across the room to you. It was just this gray cinder block wall that basically felt like I was in prison. And literally, it was funny because it was late in the draft. We had taken a break, and I was over at your side of the room, and I sat down and was talking to you, and I looked up, and I'm like, wow, this is a really nice view from over here. I'm like, that's not the view I have from over there. You were saying that you were asking what the conversations were like next to me. I can remember one of them very specifically. So numerous times during the day, Daniel would be asking Joe, Joe, settle down. Come on over here, And so at one point, Daniel was trying to make a determination on something, and he actually, for some known reason, wanted Joe's opinion. I'm like, I've never felt the need any time in my life when I was sober to ask for sage advice from a drunken guy. But they have their own plans over there, apparently. So Daniel was asking Joe to come over because he was on the other side of the room, and Joe was like, oh, I'm fine. Just leave me alone. And like Daniel's like, no, I need you to come over here. And I think Joe was thinking that Daniel wanted him to get away from the other people, but Daniel wanted to talk to him about some players. And Joe came over and he was like, I don't understand. Why can't I go over there? And Daniel's like, so we need to discuss what we're doing over here. And Joe's like, oh, right. Yeah. Okay. And it was like, oh, God.
Hey, we have a draft going on.
That's exactly what it was. And Daniel there was a lot of shaking of his head and chuckling because Joe was being so loud. And the nice thing was it was kind of equal for both of us. There were a lot of times when we were getting distracted, and it would be like, we'd be halfway through the bidding process, and I'd look at Daniel and I'd be like, who are we bidding on? I didn't even hear the name. And he would, every so often, he'd ask me, who are we bidding on? Who did that player just get sold to? How much? I couldn't hear anything. So it was an unbelievably fun day. It was nonstop. Amazingly, Joe made it to the end. He did stop drinking probably around 2 p.m. and started coming off that drunken high. And by the time we got to the late stages of the draft, it really quieted down. You're right. There was a lot of body swapping going on. Yeah, by the way, that name of that movie that I was referring to earlier with Ryan Reynolds and Jason Bateman was The Change Up. So appropriate. Yes, exactly. For baseball, very appropriate. I had a great time, as I always do, and it was pretty amazing. So,
Well, I can say this, and just in conclusion, to any of our league mates who may be listening to this podcast, obviously, none of the names we used were real, and I'm putting real in quotation marks here. Anyone listening to this, obviously, we love you guys to death. Our draft day is every year like Christmas Day for us. It's literally one of the most fun days we have. We all look forward to it, and we love all the guys in this league. Like I said, they're all great guys. They're all great people, and we have a great league. Would you agree with that? Because we have so many great people in it.
And we've all known each other for so long. I mean, there's 16 teams, and there's probably a core group of 10 of us who have been around since the late 90s. Think of the other guy named Steve, and it's like, oh, he's one of the newer members. And then I look up and I'm like, he's been in the league for like 10 years. I don't even know how that happened. The Brave fan, Adam, been in the league for over 15 years. And he's, again, one of the newer members. So we do have a few new members, like 2 or 3 years. But for the most part, it's the same people year after year. And we've all known each other for a long time, and we all look forward to it so much. And all this kidding is exactly that. It's kidding. It's literally, like Randy said, it's the highlight for us of our year.
I completely concur with that. And like I said, anybody who's in the league who's listening to this, we love you guys. And, we're just messing with you because, honestly, this was the most entertaining draft I think I've done in a long time. My team, frankly, probably sucks.
It does.
Thank you. And I don't care because I had such a good time on draft day. We're going to be looking back at this draft for years to come and be saying, wow, do you remember when this happened? There were so many of those moments during this draft. We could make a top 10 list for them, and we may do that for our league at some point. So, guys, we just want to thank you for a hell of a draft day that we're not going to forget anytime soon. So, coming up later on, we still have for future podcasts, we have another part of our series where we look back at the year 1989. We'll be looking at sports, will be one of our next topics on that particular year. And we also will be talking a little bit more about baseball. We told you about our fantasy draft day and how much fun it was. We'll be talking about Major League Baseball projected win totals, what we think about that, and perhaps a couple players we like and don't like as far as fantasy purposes and real life purposes, but that'll be for a future episode. Until then, please check us out at excruciatingpodcast.com. Links for all the places you can listen to us. And until next time,
thanks for listening, and we will catch you the next time. Glad to be here. It was fun doing this podcast in person with Randy. First time we've ever done it that way. Usually we're separated by about 1,200 miles, and I'll be headed back to New Jersey tomorrow, so we'll be back later in the week from our own homes. Till next time, thanks a lot for everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Excruciating Minutiae Podcast. Check us out at excruciatingpodcast.com. Please subscribe to our podcast on any of your favorite podcast platforms and follow us on Twitter at excruciatingpod. See you at the next episode.